Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Corombos of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Our first martini is good with a definite splash of crazy. The second one is definitely bad, which could influence the first martini. And then the third one is also kind of instructive crazy when it comes to how the media works and how the general public, the voting public, works. So, Jim, let's start with the first martini, possibly good, but given the long history in the region, this could be wishful thinking, but let's dig into it here. This is from Haaretz. A senior Hamas official suggested that the terrorist organization would recognize Israel as a step toward ending the long-running division between the Palestinian factions. This was originally reported by the Al Monitor. Musa Abu Marzouk, who spoke to Al Monitor in Qatar 2 months after Hamas's massacre that saw 1,200 Israelis murdered and over 260 kidnapped, said that, quote, "You should follow the official stance," unquote, adding that the official stance is that the PLO has recognized the state of Israel. A senior Hamas official said in an LBC interview aired last week that the October 7th attack against Israel was just the beginning, vowing to launch a second, a third, a fourth attacks until Israel is annihilated, adding that Israel has no place on our land. We must remove the country because it constitutes a security, military, and political catastrophe. Those would seem to be at odds, Jim, recognizing Israel's right to exist and insisting that Israel not exist. So I guess the good news here is that significant, or hopefully significant, parts of Hamas realized that this was a gargantuan long-term mistake, given Israel's resolve in the wake of the atrocities of more than 2 months ago now. So after all we've seen in the Middle East, both recently and very much into the past, is this something that's realistic? And how encouraged are you that at least somebody in Hamas thinks this is the right way to go?
Yeah, so when this news first broke, I saw some folks who I respect a great deal saying, oh my goodness, this is akin to Hamas surrendering. Other folks characterized it as Hamas crying uncle. Look, I think it's better to hear this than the usual death to the Jews rhetoric of Hamas. I think it's safe to say that, a month ago, 2 months ago, Musa Abu Marzouk or anybody else in Hamas was not saying, okay, we'll recognize Israel's right to exist. It's written into the Hamas charter that Israel must be obliterated. So look, all of the everything else aside, this is a good sign. This does indicate this. And I think if I'm Israel, I look at this and I say, aha, these guys are feeling it. They know, maybe we're closing in on their leadership. Maybe they're worried about whether there's going to be a Hamas pretty soon. If they're willing to make a concession, if they're openly discussing making a concession like this, it is a sign that we are doing our jobs and that Hamas finds itself in an increasingly desperate situation. That said, this is one guy. I don't think there are a couple of the military leader who's still out there. The guy who's the main wing leader of their political wing isn't the one saying it. I'd really love to know just how common this guy's comment. How much of Hamas does he speak for? Is this a minority view? Is this turning into a majority view within the organization? And also, what does recognition of Israel's right to exist? I mean, they're Hamas. They just killed a whole bunch of people. I don't know if we can trust them. What does a promise or even a declaration from Hamas that Israel has a right to exist, what practical effect does that have on the ground? You keep hearing folks over here on the left, and maybe I'm foreshadowing our next martini, not just on the left, but primarily on the left, say, well, what we need is a two-state solution. The Palestinians have had quasi-independence over in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank for a while. They did have that election back in 2006. Hamas won, one man, one vote, one time. You could have a Palestinian state. The problem is you keep having leadership of Palestinian groups like Hamas that want to kill people. Their goal is to wipe out the Israelis, to destroy them from Israel to the sea, right? So it's just this kind from the river to the sea. So I'd love for this to be something really significant and for everybody in Hamas to have learned some brutally hard lessons and realizing that when you use the metaphor of poke the bear, tug on Superman's cape, when you hit Israel that hard, Israel hits you back even harder to the point where you may not exist when this conflict is over. So, God, I'd love for this to be significant. My gut is telling me, unfortunately, that we've still got a long ways to go before Hamas is anything resembling a useful, responsible, and nonviolent, non-aggressor factor in the Middle East.
Yeah, I'm over here certainly wearing my skeptical hat, Jim. This goes back too far with too much behind us, not only recently, but way back when, to fully believe that Hamas could ever get behind this. But like you said, getting hammered in these airstrikes and other military operations has a way of changing your mind. But I'm curious if this is another way to try to get the Israelis to ease up and not finish the job here in what it's doing in Gaza. So would love it if it were true, but going to need a lot more evidence, I think. All right, let's talk about our first great sponsor for the day, and that is 4 Patriots, makers of so many fine products, and not just the Patriot Power Generator and the best-selling survival food kits, both of which are excellent, by the way. First of all, you got the generator, which will charge more devices for longer in a blackout with double the capacity and more peak power than ever before, plus the best-selling survival food kits. They'll last for 25 years, delicious tasting, kits with real meat and real vegetables, and great in an emergency when your power is out again. But, get the generator and you won't have that problem. Also, you got the Patriot Power Blender, the Sun Kettle Solar Cooker, and many, many more. The key is to get to the website and see what the deals are this week. Visit 4patriots.com/martini to see this week's discounts and deals before they are gone, and get free shipping on orders more than $97. Save more and get peace of mind now by going to the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini. All right, Jim, while there's perhaps a spark of hope that at least some factions of Hamas might be seeing things in a more realistic and sober light after the past couple of months, then you have stuff like this. A poll conducted by the Khalil Shikaki Institute, considered the most reliable pollster in the Palestinian territories, polling people on what they think of Hamas's decision to attack Israel on October 7th, given all that has happened since. So overall, it's 72% think it was the correct decision from Hamas, 22% say it was incorrect, and 6% weren't sure. Interestingly, there's a pretty significant divide now among people who aren't getting hammered on a daily basis and those who are. 82% of those living in the West Bank think what Hamas did was great. 12% say no. In Gaza, it's 57 to 37%. And how you're actually polling people in Gaza at this point is a little bit curious. But Jim, we've gotten this narrative from the media that there's such a stark difference from Hamas and the Palestinian people. This seems to be blowing up some narratives on the left, and whether it'll actually change any minds, I don't know. But what stuck out to you?
Yeah, well, first of all, before we go any further, Greg, I should acknowledge in today's Morning Jolt, there's a sub-headline in the section declaring 85% of Gaza Strip residents, Hamas is doing a terrific job, way to go. That's actually referring to the numbers in the West Bank, and I screwed up. So, as you noted, that the number of West Bank was very high. The percentage of Gaza's was only 52%. I think we'd all agree it should be 0, but screwed that up. And yeah, the observation that when you're actually having bombs dropped on your head, maybe you're less enthusiastic about the course that Hamas has set. By the way, previous polling, support for Hamas within the Gaza Strip and Palestinians as a whole, I'm going to say that it waxes and wanes. It very rarely gets very low. It very rarely gets overwhelmingly high. It generally goes up when tensions with Israel get worse or get higher, and it generally goes down in what passes for peacetime over there. The less overt conflict people become. And so there may be sort of a rally around the Palestinian flag effect here for Hamas. There may be a little bit of a sense of, well, we're being attacked and Hamas is the only one shooting back, so they're just hunky-dory with me. That might be some of what's going on here. And also I would point out that because Hamas effectively rules the Gaza Strip with an iron fist, I'm already seeing people saying, Jim, you got to recognize that people, a stranger calls up and asks if you support Hamas. You might be very hesitant to say no. You might be worried about, if that follows, there'll be some knock on your door for being insufficiently supportive and stuff like that. So with all of that granted, thinking back to the images we saw right after the October 7th attacks, when they were dragging the trucks were going through the streets, they've got the woman in the back, she's been raped, she's been battered, and the crowd is cheering. The crowd is loving it. They're enthusiastic. They're all, waving guns in the air. They're all waving their arms in the air. There were not, now again, the Palestinians who don't support this didn't come out of their houses, I assume. But it really seems reasonable to conclude that at minimum, a majority of Palestinians are feeling warm and fuzzy towards Hamas right now. And throughout the entirety of this conflict, when you see Israel bombing, and yes, there are civilian casualties, that's pretty much an inevitability of war in these types of circumstances. Urban conflict, Hamas operates underneath hospitals. Hamas has intertwined itself with all of the civilian infrastructure there in the Gaza Strip. If Americans don't seem sympathetic enough to the Palestinians, I think it's because they remember those images. And I think they look at the Palestinian people and say, you guys might not be the same as Hamas, but you sure as heck aren't doing a lot of effort to distinguish yourself from Hamas. And cheering for a terrorist, maybe it's not as bad as committing a terrorist act. Maybe you're not as bad as the rapist. Maybe you're not as bad as the person who's executing the children. But if you're cheering them on, I have a limited amount of sympathy in my life. The American people just aren't going to shed a lot of tears over the suffering of a population that effectively supports terrorists. Now, again, it's a broad generalization, but these polling numbers indicate that support for Hamas is pretty darn wide. Nearly 3 out of every 4. That's Palestinians. So we'll see how it shakes out. But kind of an ironic observation in light of what we discussed in the first martini. Look, if you want peace in the Middle East, you don't need the Israelis to make, concessions on settlements or land swaps. You need Palestinians to want to stop killing Israelis. And if you're supporting Hamas, that's what you support. So really what you need is not even necessarily a change in the leadership, although it probably would help. You don't just a change in the declarations of groups like Hamas, although it probably would help a little. But what really would help is if the Palestinians stopped wanting to murder people. And if you do that, boy, you can do anything.
It's fascinating just looking deeper into this poll here. Support for Hamas has tripled in the West Bank compared to 3 months ago. Meanwhile, the support for Fatah and Mahmoud Abbas is down. Demand for its dissolution rises. The Palestinian Authority, that is, rises to nearly 60%, the highest percentage ever recorded. So at least in the West Bank, it sounds like they're so excited about what happened, they want it to replace what they've got. It's not like you got good options in either place, but that's pretty disturbing.
Greg, can we take a moment to observe that Mahmoud Abbas is probably one of the few world leaders that Joe Biden can call old?
He's been around forever.
He's 88, right? We're complaining about octogenarian leaders. The Palestinians are knocking on the door of nonagerian leaders. Is that the right word? It doesn't surprise me. Let's try to put on our thinking caps and try to see life as a typical Palestinian. You probably grew up hating the Israelis. You probably blame the Israelis for a lot of your problems. And, life with the Israelis next door has never been easy. But your options are Hamas, which is, hopped up on speed, aggressive, and trying to, start Armageddon, kill everyone you can. And maybe you like it, maybe you don't. If you don't like it, your other alternative is a guy with one foot in the grave. No wonder he doesn't have a particularly high approval rate. He's there in place, but he's not actually doing anything. When's the last time anybody said, but what does Mahmoud Abbas think? So Anyway, it doesn't surprise me that Mahmoud Abbas is not particularly popular.
Yeah, worked with Arafat forever. So the fact that he's considered the more moderate figure in all this is pretty sad. But compared to Hamas, many administrations have considered him that way on both parties.
Further perspective on just how old Mahmoud Abbas is. One of my favorite stories that I wanted to work into one of the novels. I haven't figured out how to put it there. Mahmoud Abbas was allegedly a KGB agent for several years in the 1980s.
Really?
This is according to KGB archives. His code name was Krotov or Mole, and he worked for the Soviet secret police and security agency in Damascus in 1983. Now, it's been disputed, but this is the sort of thing the Soviets were doing during that period. Abbas hits the profile. Yep. So, the 88-year-old former KGB spy is the better of the two options for the Palestinians right now.
Yes. And former right-hand man of Yasser Arafat. Yeah, the options are not good. All right, let's talk about our next great sponsor, and that is Provia. Are you scared of inheriting that hair loss or thinning look just because it runs in the family? Well, for years, there's nothing you could do about it, but now there's a real solution that delivers on its promise without the harsh side effects, unwanted chemicals, without any need for a prescription. It's called Provia, and new customers are saving over 50%, plus getting free shipping on Provia's introductory package, and you can get it at proviahair.com/martini.
Provia uses a safe natural ingredient called Procopol to effectively target the three main causes of premature hair thinning and loss. Provia supports healthy scalp circulation, it delivers nourishing nutrients, and it can help healthy hair follicles anchor to your scalp. And it works guaranteed, or 100% of your money comes back.
Do not wait. Order now and save an extra 10% off just in time for the holidays at proviahair.com/martini. That's PROVIA hair.com/martini. All right, Jim, on to our final martini now. A little bit crazy, a little bit interesting as well. And this is an item that you had in the Morning Jolt. And it deals with the public's perception of different pieces of legislation. You noted a CBS News poll released over the weekend that showed that 35% of Americans have never heard of the Inflation Reduction Act. That's, of course, the perhaps most misnamed piece of legislation of all time because they claim they were fighting inflation by adding hundreds of billions of dollars to our spending. However, it was better than the far, far worse proposed Build Back Better Act, which 40% of Americans say they never heard of. 44% of Americans have never heard of the American Rescue Plan, which is the COVID bill shortly after Biden took office, $2 trillion. And 69% have never heard of the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And so lawmakers always try to come up with these very catchy titles. Sometimes they torture them into really corny acronyms and so forth. But in the end, is anybody paying attention? Now, people might know the issue as opposed to the specific title of a bill, but it's kind of an important lesson for lawmakers about what the American people actually care about and what they're paying attention to.
Well, you know, the headline in this section of the Jolt was, "No one cares about what you call your big spending bills." And yeah, you know, maybe this is, people think of, you know, the stimulus or something like that. They don't necessarily remember names like American Rescue Plan or Build Back Better, or Inflation Reduction Act was one of the best known. But even that, 40% said that people said they never heard of it. And I think people may recognize the consequences of policies and of legislation, but they don't necessarily pay much attention to the legislation. And what's interesting about, you know, Democrats had a pretty good midterm, but they run around fuming that, you know, Americans aren't giving them enough credit and they should be more popular and all that kind of stuff. Look, this is what, I mean, we've now been through, you know, actually our listeners are of all kinds of age, but we've lived through the Biden administration. Most of us have memories of the Obama administration, and a bunch of us have memories of the Clinton administration and the spending spree that Clinton stepped into. So once upon taking office. So if you're a Democratic president, you win the presidency, you take office, almost always the first thing you want to do is a big spending bill. You want to throw money around. And some of us would argue you're throwing around money to your political allies. You want to put it in the hands of unions. You want to put it, you know, you want to deliver it to certain key swing states to improve, you know, you think it's going to help improve your numbers. Investing in America's future is inevitably what every Democrat says they want to do. Then, you know, midterms come around or other elections come around. And not only does the American public not love these, you have, you know, at least most traditional Republicans or at least traditional conservatives look at this as a crazy spending spree. You can almost always find some egregious examples of pork or wasteful spending or stupid spending and these sorts of things. We all remember Barack Obama saying the shovel-ready jobs were not so shovel-ready. You know, Sheriff Joe was going to be in charge of making sure there was no waste in it and all that stuff. Like this entire, you know, the Democrat, how you govern well in the Democrats' eyes is you spend a lot of money. Now, here's the great irony. Not only does the American public not widely behind it, a good chunk of the American public, not a majority, but a chunk of it, never even notices. Like they don't even recognize the term. They don't remember the name of the bill. It's completely escaped their attention. And, you know, like, you know, maybe Consolidated Appropriations Act doesn't roll off the tongue. I saw that and I wasn't sure which one they were referring to. Chips and Science Act, I remember that. I remember that being one of the few things that the conservative people I know who followed this issue actually thought it was a really good idea. 61% of the public had never heard of it. So a lot of these things that seem like a big deal on Capitol Hill, and you get the big bill signing ceremony, and most of the public has no idea about any of this stuff. So if your idea of, like, you know, what is your measuring stick of being a good president, if most of the public doesn't notice, is it really that important? I mean, it is. I think you and I would argue the spending matters, but the entire Democratic game plan of how to be a good and popular president appears to have this fatal flaw that Americans pay almost no attention to what's going on Capitol Hill.
Well, maybe if you call it the American Rescue Plan, the American Pro-Inflation Plan, or something like that, because of the impact that it had, people would definitely remember that one. Build Back Better. That one was alliterative. Didn't actually happen, thankfully. What did they want, like $4 or $5 trillion on top of the COVID rescue plan? But big, huge spending bills generally bad. That's kind of how we look at it here from a conservative perspective, because once you make it a Christmas tree or an omnibus bill, it's just waste and giveaways, like you said, to a lot of friends. And somehow it ends up as usually Democratic Party donations again. So is that cynical enough here as we head into the holidays?
It is cynical enough. There we go. We've met our threshold.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Do subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch if you don't already, and tell your friends to do so as well. We'd love to have them along. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Also, get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Thursday and join us again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.